diplomats across the world are still on guard as the WikiLeaks geyser of embarrassing diplomatic cables continues to erupt. This time it's China's turn to be embarrassed, with officials quoted referring to their ally North Korea as a spoilt child, which they'd be prepared to ditch in favour of a reunified Korea. Our international editor Lindsey Hilsum has more.
Protesters in South Korea send their messages to the north by balloon. They're calling for the overthrow of Kim Jong-il's regime. US diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks today provide evidence that China, the North's closest ally, may not be quite as averse to that idea as you might think. The US ambassador to Kazakhstan recounts a dinner with his Chinese counterpart, who called Korea's nuclear activity a threat to the whole world's security. The South Korean deputy foreign minister told the US ambassador to Seoul that two Chinese officials had told him that China would be comfortable with a reunified Korea controlled by Seoul and anchored to the United States in a benign alliance, as long as Korea was not hostile towards China. South Korean checkpoints on Yongpyong, the island the North attacked last week. The South Koreans may have been talking up Chinese tolerance of reunification, but there's no doubt Pyongyang is a tricky ally. The North Korean envoy arrived in Beijing for talks today, as his government announced they have a new uranium enrichment facility, not what the Chinese want to hear.
China is checking all relevant reports on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's uranium enrichment projects. China strongly commits to achieving denuclearization on the Korean peninsula.
The US aircraft carrier, the George Washington, was in the Yellow Sea for a third day of maneuvers with South Korea. The Chinese haven't protested about the war games as they have in the past. Maybe they, like the Americans, simply don't know what to do about North Korea.
Well, Lindsey joins us now. Lindsey, the idea that China could live with a reunified Korea is fanciful or seriously possible?
I don't think it's fanciful, but I also don't think that that is official Chinese policy. But I do think what you get from looking at all these different cables is a sense that nobody really knows what to do about Korea, because you get the Chinese and the Americans talking to each other, the Chinese talking to the South Koreans telling the Americans what the Chinese said. And when I have spoken to Chinese officials, they have said to me that they don't have an influence over the succession, that they try to make North Korea act, as they put it, responsibly. And they always say it's really only bilateral talks with the Americans that can do anything. So they put the burden onto the Americans put the burden onto the Chinese, and the Americans, I know, are very worried at the moment about what North Korea is going to do next.
This is the last flashpoint of the Cold War. How hot is it?
It's pretty hot. I've been speaking to a senior US official very familiar with North Korea. He said to me, look, expect more what he calls provocations, things as we saw last week, the attack on the island of South Korea. They are really quite worried.
Now, when it comes to WikiLeaks, I mean, one of the rather interesting things is to see how elegantly some of these ambassadors write. I mean, particularly in the case of Prince Andrew, beautifully written telegram. Is all that going to change? I mean, is WikiLeaks going to change diplomatic behaviour?
Oh, well, I think that historians will hope not. And actually, some of these ambassadors and so on have been widely praised now in the US media for their literary style. Sometimes it's rather in the style of the old British colonial cables that you used to get. But I think that what American diplomats are very worried about is that people will no longer confide in them, that they will no longer talk to them with the trust that they may have had up till now.
Well, it's not much confidence if 3 million people get to see it, which is apparently the circulation of many of these so-called secrets.
That's right. They, of course, not all 3 million of those people within the American civil service would actually have bothered to read these things. But I think that certainly what you are going to see is, for example, people who are with the opposition in some kind of dictatorship or so on, who may fear that it would come out that they had talked to an American diplomat. They may be rather more reticent in the future.
Lindsey Hilsum.